We're now going to take a look at some of these draft prospects and ask Stephen A. to give us kind of the NBA player whose playing style closest resembles to theirs. Let's start with the National Player of the Year, Blake Griffin. Who does he remind you of?
Well, he reminds me of several guys. Amari Stoudemire with his athleticism, especially around the basket. That name comes to mind as well. Carlos Boozer, back to the basket, facing the basket. Some of the moves inside that 10-feet area. There's no question that he can be a dominant presence. And another name that comes to my mind is a name that I threw out to Clark Kellogg, the analyst for CBS, P.J. Carlesimo, former NBA coach, NBA assistant as well. Lenny Bias, who used to star at Maryland in the late 80s, a guy that was supposed to land with the Boston Celtics before he passed away suddenly and abruptly. Bottom line is Blake Griffin is a flat-out stud. I saw him at the South Regionals while I was in Memphis last week. Flat-out stud, very creative around the basket, soft hands, nice touch, can get the job done, great in the open floor as well, very, very explosive. The difference is some questions about his tenacity on the defensive side of the ball.
Some great footage right there of the late Len Bias.
Question.
What about Griffin's game reminds you of the late Len Bias?
Well, 10 feet and in. I mean, he's unstoppable. Certainly not from the perimeter because Len Bias can shoot from further away from the basket. But his NBA body, in person, he's large. He's a specimen. There's no question about it. And his creativity around the basket, 10 feet and in, this guy can make it happen. Extremely creative, very athletic, plays above the rim. Going to be very, very difficult to stop on the next level as long as he's dedicated. Can't be soft and get elbowed in the nose and be out for 3 days. That's an everyday occurrence in the NBA. You're going to have to handle your business if you're Blake Griffin, but he's a flat-out stud. Has to come out because every executive I've spoken to on the NBA level says he is the consensus #1 overall pick. It's not even a debate.
Well, let's talk about another big guy for Pitt, DeJuan Blair. He says he's not going to hire an agent just to leave open the possibility of coming back to school. Who does he remind you of?
You know, when I think about him, it's pretty difficult for me to come up with the name right now. I just look at him, the big body around the basket and what have you. I think about Big Baby, you know, Big Baby Glenn Davis for the Boston Celtics. When he was at LSU, he was balling. He was a force the year they went to the Final Four, but then he came back for that additional year, hurt his stock a little bit, didn't end up getting picked till the second round. I look at a guy like DeJuan Blair. He's a man. You understand? You get down low with him, you're going to have some problems because a big load of beef is going to be leaning up against you. But on the NBA level, remember, they play above the rim. You can put your body on people all you want, but if you can't get up a little bit more, it's not going to help you but so much. I think he's got a role on an NBA team that's yet to be defined. That's why I think it's very, very wise for him to proclaim himself ready for the NBA draft, but at the same time not hire an agent because he could always test the market, test the stock, and then decide that it may be better to go back to Pittsburgh. But he did show himself well in the NCAA tournament, and if they had gotten him the ball more against Villanova, Pitt might have went to the Final Four instead of the Villanova Wildcats. He is a stud.
Well, let's talk about another Wildcat. His team did not get into the NCAA tournament, and that is Kentucky guard Jody Meeks, top 10 in the nation in scoring. Who does he remind you of as far as his...
He's a pure shooter. I mean, it's just more streaky. I should say streakier as opposed to being pure. But he reminds me a lot of Ben Gordon. If you remember when he started at Utah. Now, this guy's about 4 to 5 inches taller than Ben Gordon, but Ben Gordon will pull up from anywhere. He had absolutely no conscience whatsoever, and he was money. And that's what I love because it kind of reminds me of myself in the playground. That is, not in college or pro, in the playground. But the guy can shoot. Doesn't have a conscience about it. I think the question mark about Jody Meeks, and he's hurt himself, and I hope he's watching, and I hope he's listening, because some of the people out there that have talked about him said that there have been times this year when he sort of faded a little bit, sort of getting into disputes with his coach Gillespie, and as a result of that, didn't seem to want the ball as much, had an attitude, but then when he wanted it bad enough, he just took over. So clearly he has the talent, but the question is, can you do it over the course of an 82-game regular season schedule? If you got an attitude and you're taking games off, that's not going to help endear you to NBA scouts. So he needs to be mindful of that, but he's got the skills, he's got the talent, and anytime you are a perimeter shooter and you're over 6'2", 6'3", you should be able to make it in the NBA because everybody can't shoot the basketball. But Jody Meeks is somebody who can do it, even though it'll be real interesting to see where his stock is right now, how he markets himself, what his position will be, especially when the opportunity or the alternative is to remain at Kentucky with John Calipari and possibly go to the Final Four next year. Could be interesting.
I like that on-court comparison between Blake Griffin and Len Bias. Great to see that old footage of the late Len Bias.